This is produced as part of the ongoing work on the website, thewaythetruthandthelife.net.
Clarifying confusion and ignorance, Quran, Islam, and Muslim. Now, we have recognized the fact that the Quran is not in the order of importance, and many of the surahs, the equivalent to chapters or books of the Quran, are obsolete and replaced by later surahs. Surah number 2 is a surah of abrogation. You can change whatever Muhammad said last from his revelations is what's important, and the others are overridden. But they are mixed up chronologically, so that's not clear to the uninitiated. And it does say Jews are apes and pigs after Muhammad built a pyramid scheme of attacking and taking booty to build an army, killed a tribe, killed those that wouldn't submit to him as the final prophet, and had peaceful surahs before that, and prayed towards Jerusalem, thinking that the Jews and Christians would accept him as a prophet. He knew Judaism quite well. That's where the memorization came from. It was the Jewish practice. And to be able to kill in the name of a god, he got from the Jewish. When they came out of Egypt, they did eradicate tribes that were doing human sacrifice, and tried to make it a safe place for the culture of Abraham, which had replaced child sacrifice with animal sacrifice. After this Jewish woman, whose family had been murdered by Muhammad and his men, had invited him and some of his men for supper and put poison in the lamb. Now, I'm not clear whether it was that or when he went back to Mecca to fight the Arab tribe there, and the Jewish tribe didn't help him. So he beheaded over 600 of the men of that tribe after he had defeated the Arabs by digging ditches for them to fall in, their horses to fall into when they came riding in a night attack. But he changed from, after one of these events, he changed from praying towards Jerusalem to praying towards Mecca. And then we have these stories of peace which are deceptive, and we've shown the Quran teaches deception, to deceive the unbeliever. It also teaches to murder the unbeliever. And we're moving on now to Islam, the people who are indoctrinated. It's indoctrination by memorization. Again, the Jewish were able to keep their culture together for thousands of years before Muhammad by having the young men memorize the Torah. Muhammad overtook this practice, and it was easy because he was illiterate, and the way that he could retain information is memorization, and that was greatly blown out of proportion in the way that Islamists speak of the history of Islam. It has been shown that there are a number of old Qurans with different interpretations, but that's denied by the religious leaders of Islam. I'm going to share with you some insights about memorization and it depends on the age at which things are memorized. So the point is, children at an early age cannot discriminate between what they've been told by somebody or what they've memorized and reality. They do not have the capacity for discrimination. And if they're indoctrinated, whether by reading or hearing, logically indoctrinated during these early brain growth stages before they've developed discrimination, they are a robot. And I'm going to show you a robot in the making. It's really a crime against humanity.
Child Basmala on Prophet Muhammad and the Jews. Accurate TV, Saudi Arabia, May 7th, 2002. Saudi Arabia call-in number 0037-888-6531. Our report today will be a little bit different because our guest will be a girl, a Muslim girl, but a true Muslim. Allah willing, may God give us the strength to give our children the same education so that the next generation of children will be true Muslims who know they are true Muslims and know who their enemies are. This child will now introduce herself. She's the daughter of a sister in Islam, Huaida, and of the artist Wagdi al-Arabi. Her name is Basmala, and I will ask her too. Peace be upon you. Allah's mercy and blessings upon you. Peace be upon you. Allah's mercy and blessings upon you. What is your name, Basmala? How old are you, Basmala? 3.5. Are you a Muslim? Yes. Basmala, do you know the Jews? Yes. Do you like them? No. Why don't you like them? Because? Because they are what? They are apes and pigs. Because they are apes and pigs? Who said that about them? Our God. Where did he say that about them? In the Koran. He said that about them in the Koran. That's right. Basmala, what did the Jews do? What? What did they do? The Pepsi company. So you know about the boycott too, Basmala. Yes. Did they love our Prophet Muhammad? No. What did the Jews do to him? He killed someone. Of course, our Prophet Muhammad was strong and could kill them. Okay. Do you know the traditions about what the Jews did to our Prophet Muhammad? Is there a story you know? Yes. Which one? The one about the Jewish woman? What did the Jewish woman do to our Prophet Muhammad? The Jewish woman? Yes. She invited the Prophet and his companions. When he asked her if she had put poison in the food, she said yes. He asked her, "Why did you do this?" She replied, "If you are a liar, you will die, and Allah will not protect you. But if you speak the truth, Allah will protect you." And God protected the Prophet, of course. And he said to his companions, "I will kill this woman." Of course, she put poison in his food, this Jewess. Basmala, Allah be praised. May our God bless her. No one could ask for a more devout girl. May God bless her and her parents. The next generation of children must be true Muslims. Allah willing.
الجاي ان شاء الله لازم هم يبقوا المسلمين الصح كده نربيهم من وهم اطفال كده ان هم يبقوا مسلمين صح.
We must educate them while they are still children to be true Muslims.
And the effects can be at an early life stage. It can be disabling. I'll give you an example of that. Or it can rob a person of their potential for individual sovereignty. They will be basically a robot. The fact is, nerve growth factor is present at different areas of the brain from the birth and even before birth. And the areas of the brain, the example that shows this clearly is the ability to see and the development of the visual parts of the brain. The experiment was with rats, and they were blinded at birth. Not blinded, but prevented from having any light stimulation. And the blinders were taken off at different ages as the rat pups developed. And they were allowed to grow to adulthood and were then sacrificed and investigated as to the development of the visual cortex. And it showed clearly after a certain age that nerve growth factor wasn't present, so even though there was stimulation, the nerve fibers did not grow. When nerve growth factor is present, if there's stimulation, the fibers actually grow. A human baby basically has their brain cells, all of them pretty much, and their brain growth is not more cells, it's this neural synaptic network and the interconnections as the neurons grow. So, and this takes place when nerve growth factor is present. If there's a hereditary disease common amongst the Jewish where there's a problem that nerve growth factor is present when it shouldn't be, and growth keeps going on and it ends up being a disability. But so there's the teachable moment or the programmable moment. What we call common sense, the healthiest concept of this is a child who grows up and goes through the life stages experiencing reality with honesty. They honestly are allowed the freedom to go and play and climb. There was a wonderful story about a blind child that wasn't overprotected and how well it developed, even though it used to fall and do all kinds of things because it was free to play. But children need experience in space, matter, and motion, their personal experience. And they need experience with communicating with other people in a trusting environment. And most children have that to one degree or another. It's really unfortunate when parents deceive the child, although that does get enculturated in some ways as a distracting the child with a focus of attention. They want something and they'll play a game to distract rather than focus attention on the reality and communicate about it. But what we want to talk about here is memorization and how it can harm. I was harmed by memorization because my teacher and my father, when I was 4 and 5, taught me spelling by rote memorization and flashcards. Well, that was fine. But then I got a new teacher. And the new teacher, it was a two-room country school, and the new teacher was from a new school of education where they used phonetics rather than rote memorization. So here I was in the middle of a brain growth stage, and I was learning in one way, and I had to learn another way. And here was the neural synaptic network partially developed in one way. Well, as a member, not a member, as a visitor to Phi Delta Kappa, that's an educational authority. There was a professor from the University of Buffalo presented his research as the speaker, and it was on spelling and the different methods of learning spelling and their effect. And what he showed was that children that were consistently taught spelling by phonetics were the best spellers. That's where you sound out the word. Children that were taught by consistent rote memorization were second best spellers. That's because there was a consistent development. Children that were started on phonetics and changed to rote memorization were still able to spell, but they were in third place. The children who were changed from rote memorization, that hard fixed memorize, to phonetics, reasoning out, were disabled. I'm in that category. I can't memorize. I have to, it ends up being a type of blessing. I have to figure everything out, and I've ended up with degrees in mathematics and physics. I worked in research. I've been able to discover a number of things because I have to think, and I'm able to build this website. I can't remember what I did in any particular way, but I have the example right there, and I just keep learning based on what I did before. I go back and relearn it anytime I want, and that's easy for me. So I'm able to progress, and I learn new things by experimentation, not memorizing what someone else said, although I'm not beyond using the help. So the point is, children at an early age cannot discriminate between what they've been told by somebody or what they've memorized and reality. They do not have the capacity for discrimination. And if they're indoctrinated, whether by reading or hearing, logically indoctrinated during these early brain growth stages before they've developed discrimination, they are a robot. I've heard much about book and movie about brainwashing by the North Korean communists during the Korean War of American prisoners of war and programming programming them to come back, and that on a certain stimulus they would respond by assassinating the president or whatever. This is a mythological concept because the soldiers were past the programmable stage. It's early life stages where this actually can take place. Having children memorize can turn them into robots, Manchurian candidates. But to take an adult, they have discriminatory ability. So the programming is really a myth. But what is happening with Islam, the teaching of some people, like the Jews, are bad, and it's okay, it's a service to God to murder them because they don't respect some name Allah or some book Koran or some political ideology called Islam. This is a crime against humanity, and we need to help the Muslims. They are doing this to their children, many of them. And we need to help the Jewish that are doing this. Not that the Jewish are teaching their children to murder, but they are indoctrinating them that they can't reason in a common sense way. They put together things like the communist revolution and rebellion against their indoctrination, but they don't have the common sense and hard to understand things on the animal level that memorization deprives human beings of. And it's not beyond our knowledge. It's not beyond our ability to do something about it. And I'm degraded sometimes. Why should I bother? Why should I care? Well, one powerful thing, and that is the truth. And that I'm able to put together these videos and the website, thewaythetruthandthelife.net. I want to finish. I want to get through with all this stuff, but I want to not stop in the middle. Awareness brings responsibility if there's something you can do about it, and this is something I can do. So I'd be glad to get on to the end that I can get to more pleasant things, or using my time to enjoy socially before I die. I'm 72 now. Not too many people interested in trying to understand what is determining our future. Not too many people interested in trying to honestly help. Most people, like my good friends at the university, are reacting out of a conditioning, a hatred for the haves. It's the haves against the have-nots. And the way the Jewish have programmed their children to not integrate, and how it's been used. The Muslims in Spain used the Jews as a go-between between them and the Christians. They could depend on the Jews better. They weren't part of the Christian community. And then the same thing, the aristocracy in Europe, who didn't want to train their serfs, and the people that were renting land from them or renting homes from them. They had courts of law and everything, but they didn't want them to become lawyers. They didn't want them to become educated. Their children were to be the generals and the priests, but they didn't want their children to be doctors, having to get their hands dirty with people. So the aristocracy in Europe discovered the Jews as a middle class. The rent collectors, they're lawyers, they're doctors. They didn't have to get their children involved in this kind of stuff. Their children could go on to be priests and generals and army officers and whatever. So these cultural things deprive many people of their individual sovereignty. It's one thing we need to be brought up with love, that we can love ourselves. That's natural. And the teaching of what builds a strong and healthy foundation is the simplest words. What Christ said when somebody asked him, "What must I do to be saved?" He said, "Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and soul and mind." Well, that's loving creation. In God we live and move and have our being. We're formed out of the eternal matter, space, and motion that I call God. And the second, love your neighbor as yourself. Because you don't need any laws. Out of love, you're not going to do bad things to other people. You will work together with them and you will be trustworthy. And we need to help free children from the deprivation that's going on in the name of women's liberation. The Muslims understand something about that. I hope the rest of the world can learn from them while we help save their children from the destructive memorization and save them from the curses of not being able to freely think or rebel. And the deception we will see here, even a Muslim saying that Muslims are to deceive the unbeliever.
We now want to bring in radical cleric Amjem Chowdhury. Nick, I know you've interviewed him in the past and have a few questions for him today.
Mr. Chowdhury, you've been listening to us discussing here your reputation in Britain. When you look at this latest effort to attack the United States, do you not worry that it is your voice that's helping radicalize people who want to do this?
Well, I think that at the end of the day, there is a struggle taking place globally, and our voices are there merely to portray the truth. Whether we like it or not, there are two camps in the world today. A camp which believes that sovereignty and supremacy belongs to man. At the head of that is Barack Obama. And the other camp believes that sovereignty and supremacy belongs to God. At the head of that is Sheikh Osama bin Laden. So
I need to step in for a minute. Yes, there is the two different camps spoken of, but there is another one, a rational camp. The spirit of truth, love of God as the source of existence, not as somebody who dictated a book to be memorized. We can investigate. The description of a thing is not the thing. You take a description of corn and put it in the ground, it won't grow. The book is a description. We need to raise children with a free mind to explore physical and behavioral reality, and in the spirit of truth. If they're given that nursing mammalian bond and somebody enters into their world so they don't become autistic, and that they are able to love themselves, that they can grow to love others like themselves, and then even go beyond the homosexual level of loving others not like self. These are normal stages of development. We're not talking about bad people. We're talking about people being deprived of their opportunity for their potential for humanity based on a mammalian nursing bond, the ability to care. And the spirit of truth available to those who have not been deprived of their sovereignty by being programmed or neglected.
what we see today is a phenomenon of the conflict between these two camps. It is on an intellectual level, it is on an economic level, it is being played out in Afghanistan and Iraq. You've seen the warnings recently from Sheikh Osama bin Laden, from Adam Ghaddan and other people.
Now we just heard Chowdhury mention his cohort, Adam Ghaddan. Adam Ghaddan was an American Jew that converted to Islam. it's easier for a Jew to convert to Islam in some ways because the Jews reject Jesus as the Son of God, as the Christ, and so do Muslims. Muslims accept Jesus as a prophet, but not the Son of God, and that he was not crucified. Muhammad is a superior prophet, and that the things about Jesus are all corrupted and with false writing is what the Muslims claim. But here we'll see an effort to confuse and degrade those who would recognize the threat that Islam is and make a mockery of them. Watch this.
Adam Gadon, the so-called American Al-Qaeda who proclaimed himself the media maven, if you will, for Al-Qaeda and was helping to produce a lot of these so-called Al-Qaeda videos that were all over the internet that made Al-Qaeda look really bad and made the Muslims look bad.
Should you fail to comply in full, we will deem it sufficient justification to continue to fight and kill Americans.
Come to find out, Adam Gadon's real name was Adam Perlman. And not only was he, in fact, Jewish, he was the grandson of a member of the board of the Anti-Defamation League. And if you've been following the history of the Anti-Defamation League, you will find out they've been very much involved in covertly supporting a lot of these so-called American Nazi movements. In fact, all the way back, just about the time of World War II, there was this scandal where the head of the American Nazi Party, which had a total membership of like 6, and yet they were getting all this press, was arrested for embezzling from his sponsors, which turned out to be the ADL, so that kind of blew up in their faces. So anyway.
This spin is amazing to me. The largest Waffen-SS group was Nazi, was Muslim, and the amount of murder and mayhem that they did in the area of it was Serbo-Croatia and now Kosovo is unbelievable. Anyway, I learned in Russia how the Russians had a problem with the Muslims flocking to join the Nazi invaders because they hated Jews and were killing Jews. A story you can find on the internet. You've got to be careful. Things like on YouTube now, you can't find Glenn Beck anymore because the Muslims and their game players have taken over the search words and put in mockery in place of it. This is why memorization is so bad. If you just go on what other people have said, you're lost. You don't know who to believe. You've got to have your feet on the ground, and that individual sovereignty comes from a healthy childhood that didn't involve the hypnotic suggestion and indoctrination and memorization. It's getting harder and harder to find people of this caliber being raised in apartment buildings and being indoctrinated in school with book learning rather than hands-on experience, and being separated from parents in daycare and in early childhood kindergarten. It's going to be a miracle if there's enough people with enough of their individual sovereignty left to see any inkling of the truth in the mess going on, that they'll just put their head in the sand until it's too late. Look what happened in Armenia. Look at the millions killed, and Obama wouldn't take a stand against them. Look what happened, 170 million murdered as the Muslims moved across through Iran and into what's now Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India. That's where the Roma and Gypsies came from. They were Hindu and Buddhist armies that were forced off the land with their families and fought for a couple generations, and finally the grandchildren had no concept of a homeland and just drifted off. Look at the history of murder. Look what's going on in the Philippines. Look what's going on in the Muslim province of China. Just please wake up and help Muslims. They're the worst victims. If you saw what they're doing to peaceful Muslims who won't toe the line and become Islamic. We're talking about Islam here as opposed to Muslim. A Muslim is somebody born, and Islam is a practice that people engage in. Let's get back to the story now. I would just add here, it's part of Islamic history to build a mosque wherever a great battle took place, and to convert other temples to mosques like it happened in Spain.
We have Adam Perlman, and he's been going around saying, I'm Al-Qaeda, I'm Al-Qaeda, see, I got a turban on my head, I'm a terrible Muslim, gotta hate me, gotta be afraid of me, and of course everybody's laughing at him now because we all know who he is. Okay.
Olga was born in Armenia. Her forefathers had came there from Iran. They were home Christians that had escaped from the Tsar at an earlier time. And in 1915, her grandmother hid a Armenian in the potato cellar, a trap door leading to it under the kitchen floor. The Turkish army came over the river into the Russian-controlled territory looking for Armenians. And they didn't discover that man. Olga knew his family and him. But they did discover an Armenian in the grain tower. The grain was kept up off the ground to keep it away from rodents, and an Armenian was hiding up there, and they found him and murdered him.
They were victims of one of the worst crimes of our age.
Some of them people run to the church, that they burned that church, and the people in it.
The tragedy happened in what is now Turkey, but to this day, Turkey goes to great lengths to deny there was a genocide.
There has not been a genocide, and if people, for political motivations, want to use it, they can go ahead and use it. But they take the risk of course, influencing their relations with Turkey.
This is the story of what happened when the most powerful nation on earth was on the verge of recognizing the Armenian genocide. It is a story of massacre and betrayal.
And he was asked about this issue from years and years ago of Armenian genocide. Tell me why that's important, and tell us how it was all handled.
Well, during the campaign, then Senator Obama said it was a widely documented fact, the issue that the Turks killed 1.5 million Armenians from 1915 to 1923. Today, well, the president had a little different tone.
Verebilirler. Bunun sonucu olarak benim yapmak istediğim şu aşamada kendi görüşlerime odaklamak değil, Türkiye'nin görüşlerine odaklanmak ve bu noktadan ileriye hareket etmektir. Çünkü geçmişte zor ve trajik olaylar yaşandı ve bütün dünya bu konuyu
So we apologize for the simultaneous translation, but basically the president saying let's let the Turks and the Armenians work it out, and not choosing to stick an eye in the eyes of his Turkish host. Jane.
Mike,
around the world who have said that as long as you occupy Muslim land, then there will be a reaction. Every cause has an effect. So either we turn a blind eye to these things and we silence the voices of truth. We don't want to hear, people who say, look, this is something that we need to take seriously, or we just live in bliss and we suffer the consequences of 9/11.
They also murdered the whole city of Armenians on the other side of the river, about 5 miles away. There was a cliff, and they marched them over the cliff, blindfolded them, men, women, children, old people, and just kept a few men alive that they then had them burn the bodies before they murdered them. And this is supposed to be forgotten, and we're supposed to just submit to Islam according to this man.
Okay, so let me be clear here. You're saying there are two camps. One's headed by Barack Obama and the other's headed by Osama bin Laden. Just for our audience here, so we're all very clear, which one of those camps are you in?
I'm in the camp of the Muslims. At the current time, that is headed by Sheikh Osama bin Laden.
So you would support Osama bin Laden if, in fact, it is Al-Qaeda's attempt to attack the United States again, as we've seen today, with these highly powerful explosive bombs sent there from Yemen?
Well, let me just say that there's no proof at the moment that Al-Qaeda is behind this particular episode. But having said that, not Al-Qaeda. I would support any Muslim doing his duty and responsibility. I live among you in the West under a covenant of security. In return for my life and wealth being protected, I will not target the life and the wealth of the people with whom I live. But that cannot be said for the people in Yemen and in Saudi Arabia and in Sudan, in Somalia, in Iraq and Afghanistan. When you send bombs over there, what do you expect them to send back to you? What did you expect to find in a package? Chocolates? Of course you're going to find bombs. They're going to give you a taste of your own medicine. And quite honestly, the answer to this is not to point the finger of blame to people like myself who are saying, well, look, let's take warning from the statements of Sheikh Osama bin Laden. Rather, we should condemn the Fir'aun and the oppressor of today, which is, in fact, Barack Obama, who is sending more troops to their death in Afghanistan and Iraq. Surely the oppressor is the one who is killing hundreds of thousands of people, not those who are killing, a minuscule number in comparison, who are trying to defend their life, honor, and property.
So what you're trying to do by holding these big internet chats with Revolution Muslim in the United States, a very virulent Islamist group with a very loud, aggressive, anti-American message, by you holding common chats with them on the internet and with others, what are you trying to do? Boost their support for this radical message that's attracting would-be terrorists in the United States?
Look, let me tell you something. Islam is the fastest growing ideology and religion in the whole of the West, including America and in Europe. In fact, we believe as Muslims one day the Sharia will be implemented everywhere, including in America. I believe as a Muslim the flag of Islam will fly over the White House. So I will propagate Islam everywhere via the net, via the conferences and demonstrations that we have. And incidentally, we do not represent a minuscule organization. I represent, inshallah, the Islamic viewpoint. If that can be proven from the divine text, then that is what I should be judged upon, not the number of people who may follow me or may not follow me. The fact is that Islam is spreading everywhere. People in your own backyard are embracing Islam, leaving Christianity and Judaism. So I am here to propagate Islam intellectually, to break down the intellectual pillars which hold up the idols of freedom.
So they have brought in the understudy, and there is a new American Al-Qaeda named Yosef Al-Khattab. Ooh, big scary name, and they've got a picture of him out there where he's holding all these guns and knives, and he's dressed up like a wannabe Rambo, and he's scowling at the camera, and he supposedly has this website with things in it, like pictures of the Statue of Liberty with an axe buried in the back of the head. I mean, very heavy-handed, very over-the-top.
There was also a link to a puppet show mocking Danny Pearl's beheading. Take a look.
Oh, that's awful. Just looking more like a movie prop than anything else here. So, as it turns out, this is another fake. His real name is Joseph Cohen.
He's a 39-year-old New York City taxi driver, as you mentioned. He called himself Yusuf al-Khattab, but he was born Joseph Cohen here in America. He is a Jew.
And he is another manufactured front to try and convince Americans that Al-Qaeda is actually here in the United States. And this is why we've got to be doing this, doing surveillance on the American people and reading their email and listening to their phone calls and all this stuff, because you never know when we're going to get into a situation with the American Al-Qaeda. And it's all a front. It's a fake. He's up there. He's there to try and create an enemy that doesn't really exist, in order to justify the totalitarian treatment of the American people and to encourage us to go and attack them before they kill us. They're already here on the home front. We've got to go bomb those gosh darn Muslims, because they're infiltrating America, and they're ripping tags off of couch cushions, and they're causing global warming, and we've got to go and it's nonsense. It's all war propaganda.
And democracy and secularism, whereas other people obviously are knocking down the physical pillars.
Mr. Chowdhury, let me bring in my colleagues from the United States, but just as I do that, let me remind you that 250,000 people signed a Facebook page in Britain condemning your actions and condemning your efforts to carry these coffins through Britain earlier this year. My colleague Elliot Spitzer would like to ask you a question. Elliot, please go ahead.
Mr. Chowdhury, just so people understand your mindset, do you maintain that the attacks in New York on 9/11 were both morally justified and compelled by your religious beliefs?
Well, you know, I believe that history did not begin on 9/11. Before 9/11, the American establishment had bombed Sudan and Afghanistan. Before 9/11, they were supporting the pirate state of Israel. Before 9/11, they were propping up the very dictators.
Mr. Chowdhury,
I'm coming to that.
Well, then answer the question. Is it morally justified?
Well, I believe that is an Islamic viewpoint, justified according to the people who carried out that operation. I may not share the same Islamic viewpoint, but I believe that they can justify that according to the divine text.
Do you
I would say
share,
to you that,
Mr. Chowdhury, do you share the view that that is morally justified?
I share the view that our action must be based upon the Quran and the teachings of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this is an Islamic opinion. I cannot deny that. Although I believe I have a covenant of security with the people, for example, in Britain, other people don't have that viewpoint, and surely it's better for me to share that with you so that both yourself and we can change the situation. We don't need to have another 7/7 or 9/11, which I think looks inevitable. We can go back to a situation where you can withdraw your troops. After all, Afghanistan is not Kansas or, you know, New York or Manhattan. That is a foreign country. You're occupying a foreign country, so obviously you will face the consequences of that.
Mr. Chowdhury, I'm Kathleen Parker, and I have a question for you. If I understood you correctly, you said a bit ago that you support any Muslim doing the work of a Muslim. Can you describe exactly what you mean by the work of a Muslim?
Yes, I believe that Islam is submission. And that applies to every aspect of our life, whether in our relationship with our families, our relationship with society, even the way that we address people and invite them to Islam. Jihad is not something which, you know, the Muslims are permanently engaged in. But there is jihad to liberate Muslim land, which is an obligation for the Muslims to support, verbally, financially, and physically, to liberate and to defend our life and our property. And of course, this is something, you know, the Muslims around the world, I don't think will differ with. They may say one thing to you in front of CNN, but I can assure you behind your backs, in every masajid, in every community center, they are standing with their Muslim brothers and sisters saying, we hope the Americans and British are pushed out of our countries and we can implement the Sharia. So this is an Islamic obligation for us to support our brothers around the world. Our land is one, our war is one, our peace is one, our honor is one. But we don't need to be in a constant state of this flux of, you know, a cycle of violence. I think that we can have a decent relationship. You withdraw your troops, stop supporting the pirate state of Israel, and then perhaps we can have a dialogue and discussion. These warnings are there in the statements of Sheikh Osama bin Laden, Sheikh Ayman al-Zawahiri, you know, Adam Ghaddan. You know, why is the American establishment not taking heed? I think that is the real question.
But you also want to impose Sharia law where you live. Does that mean that, does the work of a Muslim mean imposing Sharia law on everyone who is not a Muslim, including Americans?
Look, the Sharia law is the divine law sent by God to the final messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is justice for mankind. It will take mankind out of the shackles of man-made law into the perfection and beauty of divine law. So of course I want that everywhere. I want to share that with you. Surely it's a very noble thing to invite someone to a superior way of life. You know, if I believe that people are being oppressed, why should I not invite them to come out of that oppression? I believe that the Americans, the British, and indeed most of the world have been living in the darkness of the hegemony and the exploitation of man-made law for many, many decades. But, you know, when we open the door, when we shine the light, people don't like the light. But, you know, I think you'll find that when people actually have a look at Islam, when they look at the Sharia, they will see that it in fact has a solution for every single problem that is facing America and Britain nowadays.
At first glance, it's just another ordinary surgical procedure. But this is a perfectly healthy man about to have his hand amputated. A convicted cattle thief, he's the first person to be punished under Islamic or Sharia law, now sweeping across the Muslim north of Nigeria. These images, recorded by Sharia activists, keen to display their civilized method of punishment.
We are telling people that, look, this is what God said in his law, and whoever dares to commit offenses against God and against humanity will receive that punishment.
Later in recovery, the hapless thief begins a second sentence, learning how to cope with a lifelong disfigurement.
You know, from the inflation to the credit crunch to the exploitation.
Mr. Chowdhury, are you communicating with individuals in the United States and encouraging them to participate in attacks of this sort?
Of course I am. You know, I am participating in communication with people all around the world. As you know, the internet makes the world a very small place. You know, we have a lot of support, in fact, post-Wootton Bassett, from people as far afield as Indonesia, from India.
Mr. Chowdhury, based upon your answer, I believe, and I'm sure many prosecutors will listen to your answer, you have violated U.S. law. You deserve to be arrested, prosecuted, jailed for the rest of your life. That is what you, sir, deserve. You're a violent and heinous terrorist.
I would say to you, well, you can use as much pejorative.
As far as we're concerned, sir.
You can use as much pejorative as you wish. But my invitation is a peaceful one to people to embrace Islam and to warn them, obviously, of the consequences of occupying Muslim land.
Beck is, of course, going to take this Muslim angle, and he's going to twist it to, is the president Muslim or is he not? I don't know. We're asking questions. Let's ask questions. Clip number 2.
See, I had this crazy belief that this was a Judeo-Christian nation.
Well, you were wrong.
It doesn't discriminate. If you want to build a mosque, I have no problem with you building a mosque.
Yes, you do.
Unless we can't track the money down and you have been tied to Sharia law and terrorist organizations.
In the United States, rules on charitable giving have made it harder for Muslims to fulfill their religious obligation. That's why I'm committed to working with American Muslims to ensure that they can fulfill zakat. In the United States, rules on charitable giving have made it harder for Muslims to fulfill their religious obligation. That's why I'm committed to working with American Muslims to ensure that they can fulfill zakat.
Actions of our president now. What are we as a nation? Here he is at the inauguration.
We are a nation of Christians and Muslims, Jews and Hindus, and non-believers.
That's never been said before. I don't think that's ever been said before by the President of the United States. In that order.
In that order.
He needlessly throws his hat into the ring to defend the Ground Zero Mosque. He hosts Ramadan dinners, which President can do. But then you just add all of this stuff up. His wife goes against the advice of the advisors, jets to Spain for a vacation. What does she do there? She hits up the Alhambra Palace Mosque. Fine, it's a tourist attraction. But is there anything more to this? Are they sending messages? I don't know.
I don't know, because I'm making things up. Yeah. So I don't know where it comes from. Are they sending a message by going to the most famous palace in that city when they go, no, they're tourists. They went to the most famous place in that town. Of course they did.
They went to Spain.
What message are they sending?
What's the message? What's the message we're sending? And by the way, to get back to, I don't know how many people have made this point, probably you, but relating to the mosque, because Glenn Beck in his infinite wisdom just brought it up. You know, here's why everyone should be in favor of the mosque. Because you love your children. Now, do you want a world of your children to live in peace?
I do.
Turkey was a Christian land, the land of the seven churches, mainly Armenia before Islam existed. But as the Christians let the Muslims move in, then when they reached a majority, they started killing or converting or driving out. Until today, Turkey is 99% Muslim. I'll show you this video, and after it's done, I'll give you some insight into secular Turkey today and what's happening, and why these men that brutally murdered the three in the video have not been brought to justice yet, and why the secular generals are being paraded as possibly behind the plot.
7. Nejati Aydin was in the performance of his life. The 36-year-old was playing the role of Jesus Christ in an Easter production. Born into an Islamic family, Nejati converted to Christianity in 1994. Sitting in the audience that Easter morning were 5 Muslim men who had befriended Nejati. According to Turkish authorities, the men wanted to know more about Christianity. 10 days later, on April 18th, the men's true intentions would unravel in a brutal attack that would shake Turkey's tiny Christian community. Yüksel experienced the tension in 2005 when protesters stood outside the same building, accusing him and other believers of using a publishing company to distribute Bibles. But authorities tell us that for 2 hours, the men were repeatedly tortured. As soon as the suspects heard the police coming, they decided to end the lives of the 3 Christians. When the police burst through the door, they found the 3 with their hands and legs tied to chairs. Tilman and Nejati were dead, their throats slit open. The alleged ringleader tried to escape by jumping from the 4th-floor balcony. He is still in the hospital. Ur was on the floor, but still breathing. He was rushed to the hospital but died several hours later. And it's not just the media. Turkey's National Security Council has listed missionaries and several evangelical groups as threats to the country.
The media is saying that these people are poisoning the minds of individuals and children and youth, and so anybody, any youth will get up and say, hey, you know, if I kill one of these, then I'll look good.
Turkey is a secular country. Freedom of religion is guaranteed under the Constitution. But some fear the country is edging towards a religious state ruled by radical Islamists.
You have a son. Would
I
you
do.
like him to live in peace?
Definitely.
Probably a lot. Our enemies now, the people who oppose the greatest threat to us right now, what part of the world do they live in?
Well, Glenn Beck lives in Manhattan or Connecticut.
The foreigners who pose the
Right.
greatest.
Let's say the Middle East.
And those are mainly comprised of people of what faith?
Let's say Islam.
So it would seem to me that because if you really take it, because they're talking about whether this offends the 9/11 families, assuming that you don't actually believe that this is going to be a terrorist center. I mean, if you believe it's going to be a terrorist center, then I can't engage in a conversation, right? But if you believe that it's going to be, that it's just offensive, this is an opportunity. The whole point of what we're trying to do here, during the Bush administration, what they were trying to do when they invaded Iraq was form deals with moderate Muslims. This was the idea. This is how we'd get peace. We'd make a plan with Ahmed Chalabi, and then with Karzai in Afghanistan. We would find reasonable Muslim partners so that we could foster a degree of friendship that would then lead to peace by working with Muslims. This is the point. The idea is this kind of thing works. This is what you should be in favor of because you love your children and you don't want them to have to go fight in a war, part of the world where most concentration of people exist who hate us.
Let me buttress that point.
Well, these men were murdered it's now 2011. And Obama is being very nice to Turkey. Let me tell you what's happened in Turkey. Yes, after established a secular government, and the West has trained military there the same as in other Islamic nations, because with the military training and working together comes a rational, the same as some in Pakistan. They had a law against Islamists running the government. And Islamists did get into power a couple of times, and they were declared illegal by the Supreme Court, and the military had went and put them out and had other elections where Islamists couldn't run. The present government had been Islamist and had been illegal, had been removed because of it, and they came back looking as secularists. And now it's gone so far as they have a law against burqas in the university or public buildings, and an Islamist lawyer murdered the judge that upheld this law because he upheld it right in the courtroom. And the newspapers in Turkey are putting out stories that maybe it's these generals that are for the secular government were behind the Islamists that murdered. But there's a sneaking suspicion that the reason that these men haven't been brought to trial and convicted is because the very president of the country is one of the people that is protecting these. Is the same man that sent that flotilla to Gaza. Gaza is a place where their population has gone up 5 times in the last 30 years. The average age is 14, and we're providing them through the United Nations, much of it American money, providing them with food and homes as they have a name for it. I can't remember right now, but like the retired Turkish general said, Muslims don't have to take Europe by warfare. They're going to ride the democratic bus, and there's a name for it, by birthing. Like already the Russian military is 40% Muslim. They've got a terrible problem. So much murder on religious grounds going on, especially where I come from in the Caucasus, North Caucasus. It's estimated that by 40 Muslims will be a majority in Russia. The same birthing rate is going on all over Europe, and where the Christians and secularists aren't having babies. That's a whole nother issue. But look at the way they mock the concern about Islam.
That's the same reason why President Bush did Ramadan dinners,
yes,
just like President Obama. That's the same reason President Bush came out after 9/11 and said Islam is a religion of peace, and that this is an aberration. These are exceptions. These are not the rules, because he wanted to reach out.
I don't believe that has ever been said before.
It has never been said in that order.
In that order.
Okay. And then, you know, Frank Rich made a very similar point in the New York Times, where he said, look, you're hurting General Petraeus. He's trying to win in Afghanistan. You know who our partners in Afghanistan are? Muslims. Okay? So, and then, you know, finally, what is with the order? What's the order? It was Jan and I were trying to figure it out. I think it's that he's like Christians, and it should be Jews next.
Right.
Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, non-believers. Never said in that order. Okay, so we got one more. Let's squeeze another back one for you guys. Clip number 3.
The American people continue to reject the policies and ideology of Barack Obama in larger and larger number, and the media continues to belittle anyone who has that opinion. The more we learn of President Obama, the less we like what we see. For every poll that shows American people growing confusion over his background or his muddled spirituality or his loyalties or his policies, the mainstream
this video, doctored on the internet with the Pledge of Allegiance transposed. Actually, it was the national anthem playing, where most people don't put their hand over their heart. God damn America, that's in the Bible, for killing innocent people. God damn America, God America, USA.
This grieves my soul. I come from Pennsylvania, where in one battle more white men died in the Battle of Gettysburg than died in the whole Vietnam War. They died to free black men. It wasn't black men dying for white men. It was white men dying for black men. More people in one battle than in Pennsylvania died for, more white men died for black people than died in the whole Vietnam War to try and save them from socialism, communism, what they have now, and the lack of freedom, locking up people that speak openly, the same as it is in Muslim countries.
America chickens coming home.
Senator Obama has been a member of the same church in Chicago for 20 years. First pastor has been Reverend Jeremiah Wright, the man who performed the Obama's marriage ceremony, and the man Obama credits for the title of his book, The Audacity of Hope. Reverend Wright has built a large and loyal following at his church, the Trinity United Church of Christ, on Chicago's South Side. With a powerful voice and his strong words, Reverend Wright can be a mesmerizing presence.
The angels in heaven were singing, God never fails.
He often uses the gospel to affirm his strong political views, as in this 2003 sermon, damning the United States for its treatment of minors.
The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America? No, no, no. Not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human.
It's not known if Senator Obama was in the church on this day, but he has sought to play down Reverend Wright's overall approach.
I don't think that my church is actually particularly controversial.
During the campaign, the senator has defended what he calls Reverend Wright's social gospel.
So he was one of the leaders in calling for divestment from South Africa and some other issues like that. And he thinks it's important for us to focus on what's happening in Africa. And I agree with him on that.
But an ABC News review of more than a dozen sermons, which are offered for sale by the church, found Reverend Wright going far beyond issues of Africa. He refers to the U.S. as under the influence of the Ku Klux Klan.
And they will not only attack you if you try to point out what's going on in white America, U.S. of KKK.
He regularly mocks black Republicans as felons.
They live below the sea level. They live below the level of Clarence Colin and condemnesia.
In his first sermon after September 11, 2001, Reverend Wright said the U.S. had brought on the attacks with its own terrorism.
We bombed Hiroshima, we bombed Nagasaki, and we nuked far more than the thousands in New York and the Pentagon, and we never batted an eye. We have supported state terrorism against the Palestinians and black South Africans, and now we are indignant because the stuff we have done overseas is now brought right back into our own front yard. America's chickens coming home to roost.
Reverend Wright retired last month, but members of the church say he left a lasting impression on them and Senator Obama. Reverend Wright declined to comment or appear on this program, as did Senator Obama. In his most recent appearance in Ohio, when he was asked about it, Senator Obama said that Reverend Wright was like an old uncle who sometimes says things I don't agree with.
Press shifts into high gear to assign evil motivations like racism or bigotry, or they just write them off as stupid. Well, we've been trying to dig a little deeper, knowing that there are legitimate concerns that are totally being ignored. There are also stupid, bigoted people in America. That, I believe, is the minority. We pointed out it last night. We showed you last night. There are ample statements from the president to cause Christians to pause. We've showed a few of those statements on several occasions. We have said unequivocally that he has said, unequivocally, that we are not a Christian nation. There's one.
We are a nation of Christians and Muslims, Jews and Hindus, and non-believers.
Okay. Never been said before the president in that order. He also mocked the Bible.
When did he mock the Bible?
Which passages of Scripture should guide our public policy? Should we go with Leviticus, which suggests slavery is okay? Or we could go with Deuteronomy, which suggests stoning your child if he strays from the faith? Or should we just stick to the Sermon on the Mount? A passage that is so radical that it's doubtful that our own Defense Department would survive its application. Folks haven't been reading their Bible.
Folks, all those condescending remarks distorting our Judeo-Christian Bible did not come out of the mouth of Barack Obama's pastor, Jeremiah Wright. No, they came straight out of the mouth of Barack Obama.
Folks haven't been reading their Bible.
This guy makes
When did he say we're not a Christian nation?
No, he's saying it is implied that if
Yeah,
you
no,
say
I'm
we're
saying,
a nation of Christians and Jews and Muslims and Hindus, in that order, that we're not a Christian nation. But we're not. There are Jews and Hindus that live here, and Muslims and non-believers.
Barely.
Okay, but this is what happens. This is why people think Obama's a Muslim.
Assalamu alaikum. Many other Americans have Muslims in their families or have lived in a Muslim majority country. I know because I am one of them. But my father came from a Kenyan family that includes generations of Muslims. As a boy, I spent several years in Indonesia and heard the call of the azan at the break of dawn. I have known Islam on 3 continents before coming to the region where it was first revealed. That experience guides my conviction.
You are absolutely right that John McCain has not talked about my Muslim faith.
As the Holy Quran tells us, the Holy Quran teaches that, the Holy Quran tells us, and the Holy Quran also says, we will convey our deep appreciation for the Islamic faith, which has done so much over the centuries to shape the world.
I would like to speak directly to the people and leaders of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Your great and celebrated culture. Over many centuries, your art, your music, literature, and innovation have made the world a better and more beautiful place. We know that you are a great civilization, and your accomplishments have earned the respect of the United States and the world.
I also know civilization's debt to Islam. It was Islam at places like Uluzar that carried the light of learning through so many centuries, paving the way for Europe's Renaissance and Enlightenment. It was innovation in Muslim communities that developed the order of algebra, our magnetic...
Around 600 years after Jesus Christ, this man, Muhammad, made himself a prophet of a single God, which he had learned of while working on camel caravans from the Jewish and Christians that he traveled among. His own tribe in Mecca rejected him, but he did have followers that were persecuted by his tribe. Many fled and received security even under Christian governance of Ethiopia. He was forced out of Mecca, and with a small band of followers, he made himself a prophet, spokesman for this single God, just like Judaism. And he used the rationale of Judaism turned upside down. This rationale of Judaism was to convict societies that were sacrificing children and doing idol worship, that they were judged as unsafe to live by and were at war and forced off or exterminated. That's true. And Muhammad used this rationale and turned it upside down to serve him and the one God, Allah. That's why his own tribe was against him. His own tribe was polytheist and would not accept him as a prophet. So with the few followers that he had, he turned into a despot and left Mecca, went off making war on villages, and set up a pyramid scheme where his gang was rewarded by getting wives and booty, and he gained new members by murdering those who would not submit, and their children and wives that were able to work or serve as wives were taken as slaves. When he gained enough power, he come back and he killed his own tribe. And he went on to apparently personally behead over 600 men of the Jewish tribe that wouldn't help them. He took, of course, all their booty and the slaves, and he rewarded his people and went on from there. He never had a land. Everything that Islam has, they've gotten by rape, pillage, and plunder, by the sword. They've taken, they've stolen, they've murdered, they've beheaded, they've raped. And then they are under subjection of this law, and it's all for the justified for the sake of Allah. That's the truth. And wherever Islam gains a majority, the book itself was first of all nice towards Jews and Christians. But that was before they returned to Mecca to eradicate or convert Muhammad's own tribe. And the time that the Meccan Jewish tribe did not help Muhammad, so he exterminated those that would not convert and enslaved the women and children and killed the men. Well, Muhammad thought the people of the book, the Jews that worshipped and Christians that worshipped one God, would accept him as the latest and greatest prophet. He prayed towards the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. When he changed his mind that the Jews were not going to support him, he changed and started praying towards Mecca. When something like 7 years after they went back to Mecca and defeated the Arab tribe of Muhammad, he had a surah. That's when he got angry at the Jewish tribe. And he had a surah, number 2, that Allah can abrogate, change anything, and bring something better or do away with it. And after that, he had Surah 9. Now, the surahs are mixed up so that the initiate doesn't know about it. And but every imam knows that surahs after number 2, chronologically, are what count. But the numerical order doesn't show this. So it's confusing to the initiate. Also, the Quran does give permission to lie, and it does say of the non-believers, like in number 9, cut off their fingers, cut off their heads, and make false treaties. That is, keep them for a time, but then after a time, if they don't convert, murder them, enslave them. And that is what it teaches. And the law that comes out of this that makes it so there's no state with Islamic law where you can freely preach religion. You can't open and have a Bible study in an Islamic country. You can't advertise. And if anybody that's a Muslim converts, it's by Islamic law the death penalty for you and the one who proselytized them. That is, the one who spoke another religion to them. Just like the Christian Holy Land was taken over by rape, pillage, plunder, and enslavement, conversion by the sword, so was the area of Armenia called the area of the 7 churches in the Bible, where in those days you could freely walk and preach. Now it's an Islamic country. It's been converted by murder. And here's a picture of 3 men murdered just lately in Turkey for printing Bibles. And now if you check today, in 2010, under Erdogan in Turkey, the very people that would try to restore secular government are being accused of the murder which was done by Islamists, supporters of the Erdogan government. Take a look at what's going on there and the subterfuge. And this is where the 7 churches were. Take a look at this. Follow these things up. Take a look at this. Remember, Sunni Islam teaches to deceive the non-believers. It started off without even a meaningful alphabet. And the conquest of Persia, they beat that army because a dust storm was come from behind them and blew in the face, and they destroyed a much superior army. But they were illiterate, and when they forced those Persians that they left live, were very literate, had a very good culture, and could write the Koran in Persian. That was why now everything has to be in Arabic, because at that time the Arabs had to memorize. They had a very primitive alphabet, but that was all. That their inferiority complex led them to make everything so perfect, which was Arabic. And they invented this language with a whole bunch of dots to get enough characters to express the phonetic sounds. It's a shame. If you look, I'm a mathematician and physicist by degree. If all the nonsense about how they invented mathematics, it's a bunch of nonsense. And wonderful Christian devoted men like Newton now. But look at Spain, the rape, pillage, and plunder they did in taking virgins every year to ship to their harems in North Africa. Please look at the way they destroyed the libraries and burned the books that were exposing the Koran, and how they murdered authors, and what they did to the library that was left in Alexandria. And look at what they've done to the Christians in Egypt. Egypt was a Christian country. Please look at, and we need to help these poor Muslims. They're caught in this cult, or this theocracy, this terrible, evil, murderous suicide cult. Innocent children, the faces are innocent. The mothers sacrificing their children. Look at their face. They're like innocent little children. They're doing this out of faith in this terrible, terrible, evil book. So I don't know about burning the Quran, but it says that Jesus didn't really die on the cross, and that he was not the Christ. He was just another prophet, and he made mud birds and they flew away. But Muhammad is a greater prophet and the last prophet. He's a false prophet, and he's used these rationales to build a pyramid scheme that has taken something like 1/3 of the world. And wherever they have a foothold, they're growing by violence, intimidation, and seduction. Seduction usually where they don't have a majority. Now that's the truth of the matter. Somebody needs to stand up and protect non-Muslims from the advance of this pyramid scheme that advances, first of all, with the seduction of being nicey-nicey, and then by the sword, and then by terrorism. Don't kid yourself. This country started off confronting the terrorism of Islam. It paid 20% of its federal budget to these criminals to get back what was left of our ships and crews that they had not murdered and enslaved. Don't kid yourself. I don't know about burning the Quran, but it is definitely a book that preaches murder and hatred. It does say Jews and Christians are apes and pigs. Before that, Surah number 2, Jews and Christians were people of the book because they believed in a single God. So they could go on living in peace as long as they paid the protection racket money of the pyramid scheme. And that's the truth. Thank you. My wife is from Armenia. She grew up around Muslims, and her criticism of the video that I made was that you need to understand burning the Quran won't change things. the innocent little children have to memorize this hate as a duty. They don't hate, they're conditioned. They only have the choice to rebel or comply to the memorized Koran. And if they rebel, it's the death penalty. So burning the Koran doesn't change the indoctrination of making young minds memorize this so they grow up innocently hating Jews and Christians and willingly deceive, but then when it comes to warfare, willing to die and murder.
One of the campers, when asked if he wants to blow himself up as a suicide bomber, answers, yes.
Innocent children are taught to memorize and worship the Quran. It's in their soul. And if you burn this which they're taught to worship, they will hypnotically react with hatred. How do we help the Muslims? I didn't mean to limit it to Jews and Christians. Actually, they're a little bit privileged. All non-Muslims. Look at the Buddhist teachers they're murdering in Thailand. Look at the Hindu teachers they're murdering in India, and look at what the murdering that they're doing in the northern parts of India where Muslims are a majority, and the wars that have gone on and the murder that's gone on wherever the Muslims get a foothold, like in southern Philippines.
بصمت دامع بحنين الأم الدافئ ودعته واحتضنته والدته طويلا وطبعت على وجنتيه القبلة الأخيرة قبل لحظة الفراق الأخير بينهما وأوصته بأن لا يعود إليها إلا شهيدا. لحظات أخيرة عاشتها ام نضال مع فلذة كبدها. أصغر الاستشهاديين.
أنا بدفع ابني للجهاد في سبيل الله، واجب علينا مكلفين شرعيا إبو. يعني أنا لو بدي مثلا أعطف عليه أو إشي وأخليه يتراجع عن حاجة زي هذه ما بيكونش صح. أنا يعني بكون سويت غلط، يعني أنا بديش أمشي على عاطفتي، عاطفة الأمومة، يعني بأضحي فيها شوية لأجل أشياء أكبر من ذلك، حتى إنه يعني كمان الحاجة هذه مرتبطة بعاطفة الأمومة. ليش؟ أنا بحب ابني، فبدي أختار له الأحسن والأفضل. الأحسن مش هو الحياة هذه الدنيا، لا، عندنا حياة آخرة هي السعادة الأبدية، فإذا أنا بحب ابني بختار له السعادة الأبدية.
نقلة نوعية في العمل الجهادي وإدخال عنصر النساء، فأصبحت الأم لا تعترض طريق ولدها حينما يخرج مرابطا مجاهدا.
Abraham did away with child sacrifice. Look what's going on here. This woman is about to be elected to the Palestinian legislature for doing child sacrifice. Not only did she sacrifice her boys to Allah, one of them murdered 5 other children in the process of his own self-sacrifice. This is Abraham set the example of sacrificing animals and stopping child sacrifice. How many people can't see what's going on here? This is child sacrifice. You indoctrinate them as little children and they have no choice. They're willing to die and murder for their God. It's child sacrifice. It's such an evil thing. Why can't people see the evil of this indoctrination, the evil that is in the Quran, what is harming Muslims, and how to help them? First of all, we have to say the truth. The problem here is separating the Islamic indoctrination from the poor people who are Muslims and helping them save their children from being sacrificed to God, this God of theirs. there is sacrifice that makes life worth living. I will show you 3 quick examples here.
He loved to serve the Lord. That was his passion.
Born into an Islamic family, Najati converted to Christianity in 1994.
His family was so upset about his conversion, they even put a gun into his head and asked him to recant, but he did not.
Sitting in the audience that Easter morning were 5 Muslim men who had befriended Najati. According to Turkish authorities, the men wanted to know more about Christianity.
They were pretending as they were seekers.
10 days later, on April 18th, the men's true intentions would unravel in a brutal attack that would shake Turkey's tiny Christian community. 5 men stormed into Najati's office on the 4th floor of this building. Armed with kitchen knives, the men tied up Najati and 2 other Christians, 46-year-old German citizen Tilman Geski and 32-year-old Uğur Yüksel, another Turkish convert from Islam.
Every time I close my eyes, it looks like I can picture things very well. So when I close my eyes, I always see him sitting in the office.
Tilman and Susanna moved to Malatya in 1997. They knew that living here wasn't going to be easy. The city has deep Islamist and nationalistic roots. Anti-Christian sentiments run high here. This was a tense place.
Yes, we know this.
Uğur Yüksel experienced the tension in 2005 when protesters stood outside the same building, accusing him and other believers of using a publishing company to distribute Bibles.
The Bible tells us that when we accept Jesus into our lives, we must be willing to count the cost.
What happened next behind this door is still under investigation, but authorities tell us that for 2 hours the men were repeatedly tortured.
He had lots and lots of bruises and must have been beaten up a lot.
During the torture, the men forced our husbands to recite Islamic prayers and to try to get them to renounce to the Christian faith.
Police were dispatched to the scene after getting calls from a nearby office about suspicious activity. Sources are telling CBN News that as soon as the suspects heard the police coming, they decided to end the lives of the 3 Christians. What did they do to these 3 men?
They cut their throat.
When the police burst through the door, they found the 3 with their hands and legs tied to chairs. Tilman and Najati were dead, their throats slit open. In this video obtained by CBN News, the police can be seen arresting some of the suspects inside the office. The alleged ringleader tried to escape by jumping from the 4th floor balcony. He is still in the hospital. Uğur was on the floor, but still breathing. He was rushed to the hospital, but died several hours later. The suspects reportedly told investigators that they killed the men in defense of Islam. All 5 were carrying a letter that read, "This should serve as a lesson to the enemies of our religion. We did it for our country." Do you consider your husband today a martyr for Christ?
Yes, I do. I think he died on the sake of Christ. And I can tell this to my kids, and they know that their father died for Jesus.
I miss him a lot, but I know that my father is up in heaven, having fun with Tilman and Uğur.
The attack was the 3rd against Christians in Turkey. A Catholic priest and a prominent Armenian journalist were killed in the last 12 months. The situation for Christians has gotten particularly worse in the last couple of years, especially after repeated negative stories about them in the national media. Take, for example, this particular publication. It says, 10,000 have become Christians. Turkey gripped in fear. Mustafa Akyol, a prominent Turkish journalist, believes that such false claims only fuel the anti-Christian sentiment.
The media, unfortunately, has repeatedly depicted missionaries as the 5th column of Western imperialism. And this Western imperialism supposedly tries to carve up Turkey into pieces.
And it's not just the media. Turkey's National Security Council has listed missionaries and several evangelical groups as threats to the country.
They have set us up as a target for someone or whoever wants to make himself a hero. And, you know, the government, the media is saying that these people are poisoning the minds of individuals and children and youth. And so anybody, any youth will get up and say, hey, you know, if I kill one of these, then I'll look good.
Turkey is a secular country. Freedom of religion is guaranteed under the Constitution. But some fear the country is edging towards a religious state ruled by radical Islamists. A few days after their deaths, Susanna and Shamsa publicly forgave their husbands' killers, an act that stunned the community and drew national attention.
We forgive them because Jesus forgave us.
And he said we should love our enemies.
Susanna says her husband found comfort in the words of the prophet Isaiah. His last journal entry quoted Isaiah 61 verses 1 through 3, words that today bring comfort and hope to the family he left behind, and a resolve to stay and finish the work.
The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the broken hearts, to proclaim freedom for the captives. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor.
Bati has been shot dead in an attack in Islamabad. The shooting, which took place as Bati travelled by car, has been claimed by Pakistani Taliban militants. The only Christian in the Pakistan cabinet, Bati has called for changes in the country's controversial blasphemy law. He is the second senior official killed for speaking out against the law.
Minister Bati, we forgot one question in the interview. Your life is threatened. By whom? And what sort of threats are you receiving?
The forces of violence, militant band organization, the Taliban and pro-Al-Qaeda, they want to impose their radical philosophy in Pakistan. And whoever stand against their radical philosophy, they threaten them. When I'm leading this campaign against the Sharia laws, for the abolishment of blasphemy law, and speaking for the oppressed and marginalized, persecuted Christian and other minority, these Taliban threaten me. But I want to share that I believe in Jesus Christ, who has given his own life for us. I know what is the meaning of cross, and I'm following of the cross. And I'm ready to die for a cause. I'm living for my community and suffering people, and I will die to defend their rights. So these threats and these warnings cannot change my opinion and principles. I will prefer to die for my principle and for the justice of my community, rather to compromise against on these threats.
Thank you.
Ammar is a man in mourning. His stepson Mohammed Bouazizi set fire to himself in mid-December.
He climbed up on his fruit stand and he poured petrol on himself. He climbed up there.
His mother keeps his bedroom as the day he died.
That's where he slept. That's his shirt. May my son go to paradise.
Before her son died, the now ex-president Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali visited him in hospital.
I said, Mr. President, I want my son. I don't want anything else. Nothing can replace him. He was the centre of my home.
Even amidst the grief and anger, the Bouazizis are proud. For them, he made the ultimate sacrifice in order to protest against years of abuse at the hands of a corrupt regime.
I feel like he's liberated the whole of Tunisia and all the Tunisian people. I hope he'll liberate the whole Arab world.
Several people in other Arab countries have since copied Mohammed, issuing a challenge to unpopular governments across the region.
Tools of navigation, our mastery of pens and printing, our understanding of how disease spreads and how it can be healed.
This is the last piece on this particular video. It has to do with polio. Throughout the globe there are Islamic clerics or imams that will not allow Muslims to have vaccination, and then members of that community carry the infection to Mecca for a Hajj, and people from all over the world. So where the WHO, World Health Organization, had hoped to have poliomyelitis eradicated, it keeps breaking out in different parts of the world where millions of dollars have been spent to eradicate it. I take this very serious. I had an aunt that had polio, and I had an uncle that had polio. My aunt couldn't care for her babies because her arms were too disabled. And my uncle had one leg much shorter than the other because of it. Show you some of these parts.
نحن عندك سيادة المراقب طبعا وأحداث دارفور تلقي بظلالها على السودان. وددت أن أسألك ما رأيك بما يحصل من هو المسؤول عما يحصل هناك؟
الغرب والأمريكان على وجه خصوص دبروا لهذا الأمر منذ سنوات مضت. الغرب والأمريكان؟ الأمريكان نعم على وجه التحديد يعني. والسبب إنهم درسوا هذه المنطقة دراسة وافية، منطقة دارفور تحديدا يعني. نعم. وأدركوا تماما أنها تزخر بكنوز ليس لها من مثيل في السودان حتى الآن.
يعني برأيك سيادة المراقب أنه الأمريكيين هم وراء ما يحصل في دارفور؟ نعم،
وهم وراء كل المصائب التي تحدث الآن في خارج دارفور.
هل تقبل سيادة المراقب العام أنه أن يحكم السودان رجل مسيحي مثلا الآن بعد أن دخلنا في اتفاقات السلام هنا؟
لا أقبل، لا أقبل.
حتى ولو أن الشعب انتخبه مثلا؟
أنا أتكلم عن لما ينتخبوا الشعب ويبقى حقيقة خلاص أصبح حقيقة. أما رأينا لا.
شو السبب؟
نعم.
السبب في ذلك؟
أنه الإسلام لا يقر يعني ولاية غير المسلم على المسلم.
أنك أصدرت فتوى بمنع تطعيم الأطفال على اعتبار أن خلف ذلك مؤامرة أيضا ماسونية يهودية، صحيح الكلام؟
الكلام ده صحيح 100%.
كيف؟
وأنا تابعت الموضوع ده في عدة مقالات يعني تهز الحجر، لكن لم يهتز أحد من الحكومة.
بس من أين أتتك المعلومات أنه في مؤامرة؟
أنا متابع المسألة ومعي أخوين ثلاثة كده متابعين المسألة دي عالميا من خلال الإنترنت، من خلال بعض أجهزة الإعلام، من خلال ممارسات الوزارة اللي بتنتج هذه العملية اللي أنا بعتبرها في حق الأطفال جريمة.
طب كيف ما في مراقبة صحية؟
يا أخي الكريم مراقبة صحية، يقال أنه في مراقبة صحية. أنا يعني كتبت وتحديت وزارة الصحة في أنها تجي نلتقي مع بعض في حوار، أنه هل بيثبتوا أنا أثبت وهم ينفوا، فرفضوا إلى أن يعني والحمد لله الحملة اللي أنا قمت بها في هذا الجانب آتت ثمارها ونجت آلاف الأطفال من الوقوع في براثن الحركة اليهودية التي يعني الممثلة في في حياة الأمم دي اسمها
الماسونية.
لا، الماسونية اللي هي وراء هذا الموضوع، لأن اليهود الآن لو وجدوا طريق عشان يقضوا على الناس في العالم كله وينفردوا هم في نهاية الأمر بالحكم.
This page shows places where polio is broken out, largely in Muslim areas.
Islamic culture has given us majestic arches and soaring spires, timeless poetry and cherished music, elegant calligraphy, and places of peaceful contemplation. They have fought in our wars, they have served in our government, they have stood for civil rights, they have started businesses, they have taught at our universities, they've excelled in our sports arenas, they've won Nobel Prizes, built our tallest building, and lit the Olympic torch. And when the first Muslim American was recently elected to Congress, he took the oath to defend our Constitution using the same Holy Koran.
When Keith Ellison of Minnesota 5th District was sworn in on Jefferson's Koran, the comment was made that this shows the positive influence of the Koran on Jefferson, which shows the absolute lack of knowledge of history. Jefferson was involved in a war with Muslim terrorists, and that war lasted 32 years in American history. It's the first declared war against America after we had our independence. And it was a war that consumed a huge portion of America's thinking and time. As a matter of fact, when George Washington became president, by 1795, 16% of the federal budget was spent on the war against Islamic terrorists, against Americans. By the time Jefferson became president in 1801, 20% of the federal budget. So this is something in his thinking. Ironically, Thomas Jefferson was one of the first 3 diplomats dispatched from America to go negotiate with Muslim terrorists. And in doing so, there were 5 nations who had come after America. Our problem was we didn't have a military. We had a bunch of great farmers who could grab their squirrel rifles and go shoot British if they needed to, but being able to defend Americans overseas never crossed our minds. And everywhere an American flag was sailing across the ocean, particularly in the Mediterranean, when Islamic nations saw that, they said, Americans, let's go get them. And so those nations had declared war on what they called the Christian nations, about 9 nations. They had France and Spain and Portugal, and they had Scandinavia and Sweden. They had 9 nations, and America was one of them. Well, every other nation had a navy with which to defend itself. America didn't. So all we could do was try to negotiate with these guys. And so Congress in 1784, now we finished the American Revolution in 1783, 1784, Congress sends 3 diplomats. They send Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin and John Adams. Go meet with these 5 nations. Let's try to work out an arrangement where they want to attack American ships and American non-military folks overseas. And after 2 years, Adams and Jefferson had developed such a relationship with the Muslim negotiator that they felt comfortable in asking him some very candid questions, and they did. And the answers to those questions, Adams and Jefferson wrote down, sent back to the State Department. They're still public record to this day. Go online and read them. And they simply asked us again, we don't understand. We have done nothing to you, and yet you continue to attack. Why the unprovoked attacks? And the Muslim ambassador said, it's because our Quran requires it. We're required to make war on you and to enslave you if we can, and we get to go to paradise if we, and he went through all these reasons. And so for a couple of Americans to go, time out, you mean to tell me that a holy book says that if you kill someone, you go to heaven? It's not what our book says. And so Jefferson, he's always shown this characteristic in his life. He does not necessarily believe what someone else tells him. Jefferson goes and gets a Quran and reads it for himself. And it's very much like Sun Tzu said, that the Chinese general principles of war, know your enemy. I mean, these are the guys he's having to deal with and negotiate with. I need to know how they think. So Jefferson acquaints himself with that. And so he gets a Quran. It happened to be a 1746 edition of the Quran that he got. But as he was dealing with that as diplomats, then George Washington becomes president. He's Secretary of State under George Washington, still having to deal with these same guys through 8 years of Washington's presidency. Then he's vice president under Thomas Jefferson, another 4 years of having to deal with these guys. So when he became president in 1801, he said, we're done with negotiations. And he took the brand new American Navy, he loaded up 2 military expeditions, he put the Marines there on the Navy, and sent them for the next 5 years. We had troops on the ground going through those nations saying, we're not negotiating anymore. We're settling it now. So yeah, the Quran did have a definite impact on Jefferson, but not in the way that Keith Ellison would suggest.
In ancient times and in our times, Muslim communities have been at the forefront of innovation and education. Islam is not part of the problem in combating violent extremism. It is an important part of promoting peace. The enduring faith of over 1 billion people is so much bigger than the narrow hatred of a few. In the United States, rules on charitable giving have made it harder for Muslims to fulfill their religious obligation. That's why I'm committed to working with American Muslims to ensure that they can fulfill zakat. It is important for Western countries to avoid impeding Muslim citizens from practicing religion as they see fit. In the United States, rules on charitable giving have made it harder for Muslims to fulfill their religious obligation. That's why I'm committed to working with American Muslims to ensure that they can fulfill zakat. And I consider it part of my responsibility as President of the United States to fight against negative stereotypes of Islam wherever they appear.
We are no longer a Christian nation. We do not consider ourselves a Christian nation.
The United States has been enriched by Muslim Americans. Since our founding, American Muslims have enriched the United States. Islam has always been a part of America's story. There is a mosque in every state in our union and over 1,200 mosques within our borders.
You know, one of the points I want to make is that if you actually took the number of Muslims Americans, we'd be one of the largest Muslim countries in the world.
Let there be no doubt, Islam is a part of America.
He did bow to the Muslim king, while he did not do it to the British Queen of England. And by bowing, he showed the world that I am subservient. I do bow down to you as a Muslim king, something no other president has done with Saudi Arabia. The Saudi king is his peer. He is not his subordinate in order to bow for him. And this is exactly what Obama did. Usually it is out of respect that someone would nod his head when bowing to royalty, and the ladies will give curtsy. But Obama went beyond what is required as a head of state and bowed to the Saudi king, and that's unacceptable. It sent the wrong symbol.
When you say it sends the wrong signal, what signal do you think it sends?
It sent a message that Islam is superior to any other master or king or president in the world, that an American president bowed to a Muslim king. It also sent a message that terrorism and jihadism is giving Islam the respect it should have on the world stage, to the point that it made an American president, for the first time in history, bow to a Muslim king.
And this is a common thought shared by all the therefore
Presidential candidate Barack Obama is trying to change political fashion. He gave a speech in Iowa City today, and he wasn't wearing an American flag pin. Those pins have become synonymous with politicians since 9/11. Obama says he doesn't like how the pin has come to represent patriotism in America.
I won't wear that pin on my chest.
It's a little weird, Alan, that in the middle of the campaign the guy takes off the American flag that most people wear because they're proud of their country.
Let me speak as clearly and as plainly as I can. America is not and never will be at war with Islam.
Thank you. And Eid Shoma Mubarak.
Because he says muddled faith, his questionable loyalties.
Questionable loyalties? Muddled faith?
No, they just make it
No,
up.
he just makes it up. He's why. That's why. That's why people believe it, and that's why it's deceitful, manipulative, and, yes, ignorant.
Ignorant.
But amongst themselves, it's very clear what it amounts to being in Islam. And the background here, criticizing Obama, like he didn't say anything against the Bible, or he has shown allegiance to the United States, or he has shown his Christian faith. In fact, he canceled the National Day of Prayer. So we'll present these things. The purpose of this part 2 is to discuss Islam. Remember, the overall purpose is to differentiate between the Quran, Islam, and Muslims. And always remember, you need to hate the sin but love the sinner. But to know what the sin is, we showed that by memorization you can take a young person and they think it's a service to God to murder. If you teach them to memorize that when they're at a young age before they have discrimination. So let's get on with it. Thank you.